Amen. Chaim Baruch. They say a story about this wealthy man who owned a lot of real estate, and he was visiting one of his farms, and he tripped and he got hurt and he fell in a ditch, and they tried to revive the guy, tried to bring him back up. He was knocked out, and whatever they do, they can't bring the guy back up, and they called the rabbi. Rabbi, what should we do? This guy is not getting up. We're trying so hard, he's not getting up. Rabbi says, I know what to do. He goes over to the guy, and after a few seconds, the guy gets up. They said, Rabbi, what happened? What'd you do? Rabbi said, this guy is a little bit of a miser. Everyone's saying to him, give me your hand, give me your hand, give me your hand. He's like, I don't want to give my hand. So I said to him, here, take my hand. So all of a sudden he woke up. So the name of this week's Torah portion is Teruma. Teruma means to give. This is a Torah portion about giving. But it's interesting that the Torah opens up with this Torah portion with the words, take for me a donation. The word to take and the word to give are completely the opposites. When we think of the word take, you think of like selfishness, you think of like the dignity of the human spirit, a person. You think of giving, you think of the majesty of a Jew. You think the power of kindness and generosity. And the question is, how come the Torah is describing giving with the word taking? Doesn't make any sense. And just grammatically, what's the meaning of taking? Where are they taking it to? In other words, the Torah is talking about building God's tabernacle. And the Torah says the Jewish people are commanded to take gold and silver and copper and do what with it? I mean, when you take, what happens when you take? There's something which wasn't yours, and now you take it, now it's yours. When you give, you take something out of your possession, out of what belongs to you, and you give it away. So if they're taking something, they're bringing it into their possession. But the Torah is not talking about that. The Torah is talking about taking what belongs to them and giving it away to build God's house. So how come the Torah is describing this with the words to take when it really means to give? And by the way, it's not the first time the Torah uses this funny language. Earlier on, when the Torah talks about having guests, about Abraham having guests in his house, the Torah says, these guests come to Abraham's house, and Abraham says, let's take some bread for our guests. Instead of let's give our guests some bread, he says, let's take bread for our guests. So what does that mean? So most commentaries address this question, and they address it in the same in more of a homiletical interpretation. And they say something which is very important in our very confused generation. In our confused generation, people are very afraid to give. People are afraid to give themselves to a higher ideal. People are afraid to get married. Well, okay, I don't want to get married. I don't want to. Okay, if they get married, I don't want to have children. People are afraid to go out of themselves and to give. And the Torah is telling us something very important, to give us a paradigm shift. By the Torah titling the word giving with the word taking, the Torah is telling us that when you give, that is the biggest taking. When you give something away, you're really getting the most. When you take, you become rich. When you give, you become fortunate. So that's why the Torah is telling us to take a donation, because when you give a donation, you're the ones who's receiving the most. There was a great rabbi in Spain. His name was the farbrengen. He was the treasurer for the king of Spain, and he was accused, as many good Jewish advisors to kings have been accused in history, of being a thief. And he told the king, it's not true, I'm not a thief. The king says, well, let's check this out. How much do you own? He told the king, I own $300,000. That's all my possessions equals to $300,000. King's like, he's angry at him. I know your house is worth more than $300,000. What do you mean you own $300,000? Your Majesty, you asked me what belongs to me. All the things that I have don't really belong to me. The only thing that belongs to me is what I have given away. That can really be said that it's mine. Everything else, it's here today, it's gone tomorrow. The only thing that I really own, it's mine forever. Shalom Aleichem Yosef. We saved you a hamburger. and fries. The only thing, Shalom Aleichem Menachem Mendel. The only thing that you could really say that belongs to you is what you've given. That's how the Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik explains this verse. He says that there was once a king, the Talmud talks about, named Munbaz. Munbaz was a very generous king, and although all of his predecessors had amassed a huge fortune, he was giving it away to help the poor in his country. And Munbaz said about his habit of generosity, he said that my forefathers, they amassed a fortune for others. I have a fortune for myself, because by giving it, I'm really taking something far more for myself. So that's the way many commentaries explain this idea of taking and giving, that when you give, you're really taking. We'll get into that in Hashem a little later, but I want to share with you another explanation of the Rebbe about this Torah portion, about why when the Torah uses the words taking, when it's really talking about giving. Take from your donation. When it's really talking about giving, why does it say to take? So to understand this, we have to first explain a more basic question. A question like this. Jewish people have just come out of Egypt. They're there for 200 years in slavery. Before they leave Egypt, God blesses them with great wealth. And they have silver and gold, all kinds of great stuff. And then God says, I want you to make for me a house, a temple, for God's presence. I want you to build a place for me. Now, God doesn't need us to build a temple for himself. He could have built a temple himself. He doesn't need us. He has all the silver and gold. Imagine a king goes to Skid Row of his kingdom. He says, I need a palace. Everyone has to give to make my palace. It's ridiculous. Why would the king ask the poor in his country to make a beautiful palace for himself? It's so incongruous. That doesn't make any sense. What's the king doing? He's taking all of the silver and gold from the poor people in his country to make a palace. But that's what God does. He's asking us to build a temple for him. He doesn't need us to build a temple for him. He has his own silver and gold. He doesn't need to take ours. We just came out of Egypt. We're Baruch Hashem. We're doing well. And God says, okay, I want you guys to build a temple for me. He needs us to build a temple for him. He couldn't do it himself. What does this mean? So, the answer is like this. Shalom Aleichem Yosef. Wow, you have two Yosef HaKohens here. He's also Yosef, also a Kohen. So what's the reason? Please wash, it's kosher tonight. What's the reason that God asks us to participate in donating funds to build his temple when he has all the funds himself? What's the point? The answer is like this. Up to this point, God made the first step towards us. He gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. He says he chose us as his nation. He says, I want to marry you guys. I want you to be my wife. I want you to be my people. So at this point in this week's Torah portion, here's where God says, so what do you guys say? Do you want to accept or not? So by the Jewish people taking from their own possessions and building a home for God, by doing that they said, I do. They accepted and they entered into a marriage with Hashem. So it wasn't that Hashem commanded us to give. There was no commandment to give. The commandment is only to set up a system of accepting the donations. There's no commandment to give. The commandment is to take. Commandment is when the Torah starts off this Torah portion, it says take donations. The commandment is not the Jewish people. They don't have to. God's not telling them they have to give donations. There's a custom that a kala, when she gets married, she buys her husband a talus. Why should she buy a talus? Because a talus has 32 strings, and 32 in Hebrew is the numerical equivalent to the word heart. Because a kala, when she gets married, she gives her husband her heart. Imagine if there was a rule. A kala has to give her husband a talus. You got to do it. You have to do this. It will ruin the whole thing. The whole thing is she's giving her husband her heart. You can't tell someone, "Give me your heart," and someone, you're not. If you're told to give your heart, you're not giving your heart. You're
just take it.
So that's exactly what the Torah is saying. The mitzvah isn't to give anything to the tabernacle. To donate wasn't the mitzvah. Wasn't the commandment. The commandment was only to accept it. The commandment was to take it from the Jewish people. But why they give? They gave because they wanted to give. They gave because just like a husband and wife, they get together and they have an apartment. And one guy speaks to the landlord, or one of them goes to get the furniture, and they figure out where to put everything. They're working together to create a space. That's why there's no commandment to give, it's coming from the Jewish people themselves. This is understood on a simple level, but I want to add another caveat to this equation, which will make this on a whole new level. And that is according to Rashi. There's an argument between Rashi and Nachmanides. When exactly did God ask us to build this temple? At what point did God request that we should build this temple? According to Nachmanides, the commandment came in the order the Torah writes it. The Torah says, first build a temple, and then the sin of the golden calf happens later on, the next Torah portion. Right after last Torah portion, Moses comes up the mountain, he speaks to God, and God tells him, I want you to build me a tabernacle. So it was more of a romantic time. We had just gotten the Torah, and then God says, okay, now I want to build a home together. So then it makes sense that the home has to come from us, from our own decision. But according to Rashi, the commandment to build God's temple, when was that? It was after the sin of the golden calf. After the sin of the golden calf. So what's the idea of us building a temple for God after the sin of the golden calf? God's giving us a chance to show with the things that we have that we're really sorry, that we want to make things right. God's giving us a chance to create a space for Him, and to say I'm sorry, and to regret the past. And imagine you have two children are fighting, and the parent or the teacher says, "Say you're sorry. Say you're sorry." It's not worth anything. The child says maybe you want to encourage the child to learn how to say I'm sorry. So maybe when it gets older, he'll say. But at this point, the child doesn't know what he's just saying I'm sorry. So if there was a commandment to build a home for God, a commandment to donate for that home, that would ruin the whole thing. That would be like God saying to the Jewish people, "Say I'm sorry." And therefore, of course, there was no commandment to donate. The commandment was just to accept the donations. The commandment was just to take the donations, to set up a system where they would accept the donations. But to give, that had to come from the Jewish people. There's a beautiful medrash. Medrash writes about a king who got married, and his wife sinned against him, and the king left. And the king one day visits, and everyone in the town is saying, your husband's never coming back. But one day the king comes back, and he eats and drinks together with his wife, and people are still saying, it's not going to last. But then what happens is like this. They smell a perfume coming from her home. She is adorning herself to meet the king. So, if she's adorning herself to meet the king, then the king is actually returned. Similarly, after the sin of the golden calf, the nations of the world said, God wanted to make this people his people, but it didn't work out. He's not going to come back to them. But when we built the tabernacle for God, and we brought the incense in the tabernacle, then it was clear to everyone in the world that God was taking us back. So that's the idea of building a tabernacle for God. It's to make a space to say I'm sorry to God and to rectify the mistakes of the past. And therefore there can't be a commandment about it. It has to come from within. If there's a commandment, then it loses the whole flavor of what it's about. This explains another phenomena. In life, what do children see in their parents that they remember? What do children get from their parents that they actually will emulate? Not the things that parents have to do. Kids don't learn from their parents the things that the parents have to do. The kids learn from their parents the things that what their parents do in their own time, and when they don't have to do anything, what they want to do. They say about this rabbi and this businessman that they had the opposite experience in raising their children. The rabbi sees all of his children going into business, and the businessman sees all of his children going into Torah study and teaching Torah. And they asked the rabbi asked the businessman, "What's going on?" Basically, the businessman says, "At the end of the day, I'm done business. I want to relax. What do I do when I want to relax? I take out a book of Torah and I study it. My kids see me coming home and reading Torah, like, oh, this is great. That's what we should do." What does the rabbi do? All day he's teaching Torah. What does he do when he comes home? He turns on television, opens a newspaper, he relaxes. So his kids say, all day he's teaching Torah, but what is he into? How does he relax? What does he like? So also, when kids see that you put your heart in something, you want to make it beautiful, and you don't have to, but this is what you decided to get into, and this is valuable to you, and you just have to. Thank you very much, David. Then the kids say that that's something they want to emulate. There's still a hamburger available. Rav David doesn't want his hamburger. He thinks ham is not kosher. No, you're David and he's David. Oh. But his hamburger next to him is waiting for you to say a mitzvah. Big enough for two Davids. Okay. Hey Mike, shalom aleichem. So the point that we're saying so far is that the commandment of the Torah to take the donations was just that. It was a commandment to take, it wasn't a commandment to give, because the giving had to come from within them. This explains something else. The Jewish people are a nation that remembers. That's who we are. We remember everything. Whatever we do, all of our commandments, all of our customs, all about things in the past, preparing for the future, but we never forget the past. Here's something that looks like we all forgot. When we go to Mount Sinai, the place God gave us the Torah, you'd expect there to be like this huge monument there, this huge sign, turn off your cell phone, and we're going to open up your book of Psalms or something where you have now entered holy space. You expect that whole area to have like Kodak shops all around, and you know what? Where is Mount Sinai? Nobody knows. Nobody knows exactly where Mount Sinai is. They say this mountain is Mount Sinai, but it's not 100% clear which mountain is Mount Sinai. What happened? Aren't we the nation that remembers? And what about Jerusalem? Jerusalem, everyone knows. Jerusalem, that's a holy city. Everyone knows where Jerusalem is. What's the difference? How come Mount Sinai nobody knows, and Jerusalem, everyone knows is a holy city? The answer is again, how did Mount Sinai become holy? Because God made it holy. God came at Mount Sinai. God revealed himself. It was all coming from him. How did Jerusalem become holy? We built a home for God. What the Jew does by himself, from within, from his own initiative, that has permanence. That lasts.
I think also like saying that the ashes that Yaakov made for the carbon, that they were holy, but like after he was done with the mizbeach, it wasn't holy anymore.
Yeah, there's a similar concept, but all the things that were done before the Torah was given, they didn't retain holiness. So once the Torah was given, things did retain holiness. But here, by Mount Sinai's exception, that was a place the Torah was given, and yet there's no real holiness there because it all came from above. So, what we're getting over here, what we're learning from this is that not just giving is important, but the way you give is important. The Talmud says a story about two brothers. One of them is world famous. I'm sure you've heard of him before. His name was Hillel. If you've never heard of him, just drive on Olympic and Doheny. There's a big school there. It says Hillel. His name after this man named Hillel. And he had a brother. What was his brother's name? Anybody know? Shamar? Nope. That was the one who always argued with him. His brother's name was Shavna. Hillel and Shavna are both immigrants to Jerusalem from Babylonia. Shavna is a businessman. Hillel was a Torah scholar. Hillel was so poor, the Talmud says, that he wanted to study Torah, but they charged. They charged people to enter the synagogue. He couldn't afford it. So the famous story is that Hillel once climbed on top of the roof of the temple to hear the Torah lesson, and it was snowing, and he passed out, and they had to revive him. And now, meanwhile, his brother Shavna is this fantastically wealthy businessman, and he has forgotten his brother apparently, but eventually this poor guy Hillel becomes the head of the Jewish court. He becomes the head of the Sanhedrin. He becomes the leader of the Jewish people, and when that happens, what happens to Shavna? Shavna is like, oh, that's my brother. And I want to share in all of the wonderful things you're doing. I want to help you, Hillel. So the wise men of the generation told Shavna that his gift wasn't considered honorable, because he only was giving because he saw the honor in what he was doing. He wasn't giving altruistically. He was just giving because... Now, of course, in regards to giving, altruism isn't so important. Famous story of the Alter Rebbe, that this guy owned this inn. He owned his innkeeper. And he came to the Alter Rebbe and he told the Alter Rebbe, when people come to me and they are hungry and they're thirsty, I feed them. But I don't feed them because I want to help them. I feed them because my ego is bothering me. My conscience is bothering me. I feel bad that that they come, but I don't really care about them. It's not kindness. It's just ego. So I think I should stop. It's not true. It's not emes. It's not emes. So Alter Rebbe said, don't worry about the truth in your heart. Worry about the truth in the people that visit you, in their stomach. Worry about the truth of their stomach. Make sure that their stomach is truly full and their glasses are truly full when they visit your inn. So in regards to charity, it's important just to give, and the giving itself has a value. But from here we're learning from this week's Torah portion that God didn't command us because He wanted it to come from within. But I want to get back to the subject that we started with, and that is The vayikuli truma means when you're giving, you're really taking. That's what the Torah says. Vayichu, take a donation, because the greatest gift you get is from giving. There was a Jew named from Hadera in Jerusalem, Rabbi Binyamin Katanil. Rabbi Binyamin, he had a gentleman in his synagogue who was not blessed with children, and they were married for many years. And generally, when people ask the Rebbe for blessings, for peace at home, to have children, the Rebbe generally, it's hard to say the word generally, but very, very often, the Rebbe told families who are having issues with domestic harmony and with and children which they wanted to have a blessing for children, even children which were raised and wanted to marry out of the faith. The Rebbe told the parents the same advice. The advice is to keep the laws of family purity very carefully. In other words, keeping the laws of family purity doesn't have only effect on the children that were born, are going to be born. Even children that were born already, their health and their beauty and their spiritual beauty is affected by their parents keeping the laws of family purity. So this Rabbi Binyamin, he saw this guy in a synagogue. He wanted a blessing for children. So he told the guy, you should really keep this mitzvah very carefully. It's a very special mitzvah. Every mitzvah has a blessing. The blessing of this mitzvah is to have children. I want you to keep this mitzvah. The guy's like, that's okay. I keep it. I know how to keep it. And Rabbi Binyamin knows what I know how to keep it means. It means, like we say, tagriban. Tagriban. He wasn't really keeping it. It's tagriban. Almost keeping it. So Binyamin said, I want to meet with you. Let's talk. I want to share with you the details of this. And the guy was like, unvar. He's pushing him off. But one day they had a farbrengen. One day they got together, and apparently Rabbi Binyamin had too much to drink. Apparently this guy had too much to drink too. And he says to him, I really care about you. I want you to do this. This is very important. And I'll give you $1 from the Rebbe. The Rebbe had given me $1. I'll give you my $1 the Rebbe gave me, which everyone knows is such a great blessing, $1 from the Rebbe. I'll give that to you if you accept to do this mitzvah carefully. I just want you to have the blessing for children, so I want you to keep this mitzvah carefully. So he's like, okay, deal. And they start learning together. And within a few weeks, his wife is pregnant. And it's hard to understand the story, but it's a true story. Binyamin does not give the guy the $1. Doesn't give it to him. The guy kept his deal, but Binyamin had a hard time parting with it, because if anyone who is familiar at all with the relationship of a chassid and a rebbe, to get something personal from the rebbe, it's very special. And he I don't think it was a flaw in his character. I think there was something special about his connection to the rebbe, which made it so hard for him to part with his $1. It's hard to convey this relationship, but if you're familiar, that is the story. So a week passes, a month passes. The guy's like, "Where is the $1? We made a deal." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I'm going to give you the $1." One day, the guy tells Rabbi Binyamin, "Okay, Rabbi, I'm coming to your house at 9:00 tonight, and I'm not leaving without the $1." Rabbi Binyamin goes home. He gets a phone call from his mother, and he realizes, the game is up. He has to give the guy the $1. He made a deal. He's going to give him the $1. That's it. He's losing the $1. His mother calls him up. She says, "I have a $1 for you from the Rebbe." What happened? She said in 1975, she was by the Rebbe, and she asked Rebbe for a bracha for her son Binyamin. That's her son's name, Binyamin. And the Rebbe gave me a $1 for you, and I put it away, and I never even thought about it. But really, this is your $1. The Rebbe gave this $1 for you. The Rebbe gave a $1 for Binyamin, so it's yours. So when you give, you also receive, and Hashem doesn't leave anybody in debt. Hashem always takes care of us. There was someone once sent a donation to the Rebbe for tzedakah. I think it was before the Rebbe became a Rebbe, and he was still secretary for his father-in-law. And the Rebbe writes back a very interesting letter to this guy. He says, in general, there's 2 ways of giving tzedakah, 2 ways of giving of charity. One way is you're blessed with some financial success, and you give off a portion to charity. That's one way. The other way is you don't have any success in finances, and you're stuck, but you give it away anyways, despite it being hard. And Hashem doesn't remain in debt. God always pays back. So if you're going to go beyond yourself, Hashem will help you. Hashem will help you. That what you wanted to do will be successful. So the Rebbe said, I saw the amount of the check that you wrote, and I'm wondering, why do you feel so bad for God? Why do you feel so? Why do you have Rahmanas on God? You should have given a lot. God will take care of himself. He'll be able to give a lot more back. What are you doing? Maimonides writes that there's no greater simcha, no greater joy that God has than lifting the spirits of people which are downtrodden. There's all kinds of things you could do with your money, but there's nothing greater than lifting someone's spirit. And someone's spirit, especially someone's spirit which is down, and lifting them up, there's no greater joy that there is. When you're giving, you are receiving. There was a little girl, 9 years old. She walked into a jewelry shop, and she asks the owner, she says, I want to buy a bracelet for my sister. My sister is so nice to us, and we're orphans. Our parents were killed in a terrorist attack, and I want to give a gift to my sister. She's so nice, she's so kind to us, and I like that bracelet. How much is that one? That bracelet is $12,000. Okay, is this enough? She has like a few shekel and a few pennies, and she puts a few agorot, a few shkalim. Yeah, he says exactly $12,000, and he gives her the bracelet. And the sister comes back later, and she says there's some misunderstanding. My sister came home with this bracelet, and I don't know what's going on. No misunderstanding. He said, your sister revived my heart. You said, my wife passed away a few years ago, and I when she came into the store and she gave me a chance to give, it just revived me. It just gave me life. In general, Maimonides says that honor brings love. Very, very often people are looking for a panacea to fix things at home between their husbands and wives. What's the answer? A lot of times it seems like there's a roadblock, and people feel that roadblock is like a brick wall and they can't break through. How could they fix up their problems at home? And there's something that Maimonides says works. You know what people are looking for in a relationship? They're looking for respect. They're looking for to be valued. They're looking for value through their spouse. So the greatest thing that gives a person value is when you give to them. When you give to your spouse, you give and you give and you give. That, the Torah says, just like water reflects your face, so too the feelings of one heart reflect in the heart of another. The giving changes. I'll tell you a story which is really shouldn't be said by anybody, but I'll tell it to you because it brings the point home. And you can't really understand this point without hearing the story. This is the last story, but it's a hard one, but you'll get it.
Do we pause the Facebook or?
I don't know. I don't want to cheat them out of the story either. So this guy is married for a little while, and he's very upset at his wife. And he goes to a Kabbalist and he says, Kabbalist, curse my wife that she should die immediately. So the Kabbalist says, well, your wife is young, and she needs to live for many, many more years. And there's nothing I can really do for you, unless she has the next month of her life, she has total pleasure and total enjoyment. That will be commensurate to living 30 years of having a little bit of enjoyment. So having 1 month of complete enjoyment will be just as much as 30 years of little enjoyment.
So no enjoying other.
So his wife suddenly is treated like a queen. He comes home and there's, you name it, he's doing it. There's flowers, there's dates, there's this, there's that, there's gifts. And at first his wife thought that, what's this guy doing? This guy's just a joke. But then after a while, she came around. She realizes, what a nice guy. What a wonderful husband I have. And she responded. At 29 days, after the end of 29 days, the Kabbalist calls up. That's when they let you know, we're going to do the curse tomorrow. No, don't do it, chas shalom. Because giving does that. Giving causes hearts to melt. This especially, as Chaim Shal mentioned, we're in the month of Adar. Month of Adar is a month of joy. And the greatest joy is lifting the spirits of somebody else. The greatest simcha, how do you become simcha? How do you become happy? The greatest happiness is by lifting someone else's spirits. And sometimes you don't have any way to help the other person's spirits, but you can't you have to be a little creative. There was a Jew who was drowning at sea, and someone sees him drowning, and although he knew how to swim, the guy's too far out, so he can't help him. So how could he help him? He says, send regards to Leviathan, the famous huge fish that we're going to eat when Mashiach comes. Says, you're going down there anyway, send regards to Leviathan. All of a sudden the guy gets energy and he starts swimming and he makes his way back to shore. So that joke that gave him the energy. That gave him the energy to swim. So this is a time. The Parshas Truma is a time of taking by giving, and giving just doesn't only mean by giving by financially, but giving someone a kind word, giving someone a smile. As Rabbi Yochanan says, it's better to give someone teeth than milk. What does that mean? Give someone teeth than milk? Smile. Exactly. To raise someone's spirits it's a big thing. So Chaim HaChaim, the Eibusher should help us all in the month of Adar to have true joy. And God asks us to be joyous. He gives us a reason to be joyous. He must give us blessings this month. If He tells us to be joyous, He must give us the reason to be joyous. And the greatest joy is, this is the month of Mazel. God gives us tremendous success this month. When a Jew sees that God's with him and whatever he's doing, that brings a Jew it warms every Jewish heart. This is a month that you see God's hand, because it's a month of Mazel. So it'll be a true month of Mazel and Simcha. Amen. And making people happy. A husband should make his wife happy this month, the Rebbe said. A father should make a child happy this month. Don't let go. Make the first move. Say I love you first. L'chaim.